especially for taking time out of your days. I'm going to start with some introductions while we wait for everyone to log in. I'd first off like to introduce Dr. Alicia Fernandez, who's going to be giving a small presentation about the vaccine. She's the director of the UCSF Latinx Center of Excellence and also part of a larger initiative at UCSF focused on community education around the vaccine. And then we have three amazing panelists here today to help us begin the conversation. Roberto Vargas, who's from the Center of Community Engagement at UCSF, Cynthia Diaz from Dolores Street, and then Omar Pimentel from Instituto Familiar de la Raza. So thank you all three of you for being here and helping us really connect with community and for all the work you are all doing around COVID. And then I also have two of my colleagues here that are going to help with hosting the Q&A, Leslie and Connie. So thank you both for being here as well. We're going to begin with a short presentation from Dr. Fernandez and then open up the conversation to the panelists. And feel free to put any questions you have in the Q&A throughout. We're going to open up to a larger Q&A for all participants after we ask a few questions. So thank you so much again for being here, and please feel free to ask any questions that you have.
I'll go ahead and get started then. Welcome. I want to add my welcome to everyone, and I'm really looking forward to answering your questions. And no question is too wild. We want to make sure that you all who are members of the community-based organizations who are trusted by the community have good information so that you feel that you can answer people's questions. I will go ahead and share my screen and get started. Can you see my screen?
If you want to go to slideshow at the top.
Yes, sorry.
No problem. And then display settings.
How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. Great. So let me give a few, short things. First, I want to start with acknowledging that there are now 2 vaccines approved in the United States, but that will change most likely within the next month, and this presentation will be up to date. We'll come back with more presentations once we know about the new vaccine. I'm only talking right now about the 2 vaccines that have been approved. These vaccines are very similar to each other, and they were made the same way. These are really sister vaccines. They have very few differences among them. And both are highly effective in preventing serious cases of COVID-19. Now, both of these vaccines require 2 shots. The first vaccine, sometimes called the Pfizer vaccine after the company that made it, you get 1 shot, then the person waits for 21 days and gets a second shot. The Pfizer vaccine is famous for requiring very, very deep refrigeration. So that is one that will most likely be used in hospitals and clinics and not used so much out in the field in big tents because of the need for deep refrigeration. The second vaccine is called the Moderna vaccine. And in that vaccine, people get 1 shot, they wait about 28 days, and they get their second shot. And that one can be used with regular vaccination. I'm quickly going to go over how the vaccines work. Now, all vaccines work by teaching the body to recognize a particular virus as foreign. So how do they do it for this? This is a picture of the coronavirus. You will see these red spikes out here, and these red spikes give it its name for like a what do you call that? A crown. Now, the virus has inside of it genetic material. What they have done, the scientists have done, is that they've taken one little part of the genetic material, which is the part that codes for these spikes. And that is what's in the vaccine. The little piece of the genetic material that codes for the spikes, called the mRNA, wrapped up in a little bundle of essentially fats, synthetic fats. This is then injected into people's arms, and this little, and the vaccine particle fuses with the human muscle cell. And then the instructions are taken over by the machinery of the muscle cell, and it has the muscle cell make these little spikes. And then all of a sudden, the muscle cell has these little spikes. And that's perfect because it teaches the body to recognize these little spikes. And then when it sees coronavirus, it'll fight it off. The important thing for me to say here is to explain again that the vaccine doesn't contain the coronavirus. It only contains the instructions. And it doesn't contain the instructions for the entire coronavirus. It only contains the instructions for one small part, the spike. The second thing that's important to realize is that the genetic information from the virus never comes into the nucleus of the muscle cell, which is where the human genetic information sits. So there is no mixing of the virus genetic information and no mixing with the human genetic information, which is why the virus can't make us mutants. So how well does a vaccine work? In the Pfizer trial, there were more than 40,000 people who participated. 21,000 got the real vaccine and 21,000 got a fake vaccine, which we call a placebo. That was really only water. Then those people were followed, and what they saw is that among people who got the vaccine, there were 8 cases of COVID-19. But among people who got the fake vaccine, the placebo, there were 162 cases of COVID-19. So that is a huge difference. And that is a protection rate of 95%. So how well does a vaccine work? Actually, both of them, they work very well. Now, what about safety that we're all concerned about? Well, when people get the first shot, they often experience arm soreness and redness at the injection site, similar to what people may have experienced when they get the flu vaccine. But with the second shot, the body has already learned a little bit how to recognize the coronavirus. And so with the second shot, the body's immune defenses fight back. And because of that, about half the people report fatigue and headache, and about 10% of people report a fever. So while these side effects only last for 1 or 2 days, and no one gets sick enough to have to go to the hospital, about 20 to 30% of people feel like they shouldn't go to work, that they don't feel up to going to work the next day, and we expect that to happen. It is a sign that the body's defenses are working. Finally, there have been cases reported of allergic reactions, severe allergic reactions to the vaccine. To date, 29 allergic reactions have been reported out of the 12 million people vaccinated. So 29 out of 12 million. And what that means is that it can occur, but it's not very common. And I hope we talk more about that in the question and answer. So what do we know about the vaccine? We know that it works very well. And because the studies were done in people from 16 all the way up through 80 or older, we know that it works very well among old people. And that's really important because as people get older, their immune systems are sometimes not so strong. We know that it works very well in both men and in women, that it works in everyone from 16 on up. It hasn't been tested in people younger than 16 yet. And it works among all races and all ethnicities. Both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines included a large number of people who are African American and included lots of Latinos. Finally, this was done on all sorts of people, people with obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, HIV, and the vaccine was found to work well in all of those people. We already talked about the side effects, and I just want to reiterate and say again that fatigue, headache, and fever can occur with that second shot. So what don't we know yet about the vaccine? We don't know whether it prevents infections without symptoms. In other words, maybe I won't get sick with COVID, but can I still carry the COVID? And importantly, can I still transmit it? We think that this will probably be no, but we don't know yet. We should know within a month or so. We don't know whether they're very, very rare side effects that would occur that we'll only see when we test more than 12 million people. Pregnant women were excluded from the vaccine trial. Pregnant women are usually excluded from trials of new medications. So we don't know yet about how safe it is during pregnancy, though I'd like it if, though the organizations of the physicians, OBGYN physicians, are recommending that all pregnant women talk to them about whether or not they should get the vaccine, as pregnancy is also a risk factor, for getting COVID. We don't know about kids. There's part of the Moderna study is being done in kids 12 to 17. So, but we won't know yet about kids younger than 12 for a while. And then, of course, we don't know about long-term side effects because the vaccine hasn't been around long-term. What we do know from other vaccines is that we don't expect them to be long-term side effects. But of course, we can't 100% know that. We also don't know how long the protection will last and whether we'll need to get booster shots like every 2 or 3 years, or maybe even faster as the virus evolves. In other words, will it be like flu shots where we have to get it every year, or will it be more like other vaccines where getting it every 5 or 10 years is enough? So as people think about this, they want to know, well, is it right for me? And what I think is really important is to balance the risks of the vaccine and the side effects and your fears of the vaccine with the risks of getting COVID-19. Now, for many people, as you all know, COVID-19 is not at all a serious illness, right? It's just maybe even just a positive test and no symptoms, or just very few symptoms. But as you also all know, 400,000 people have already died from this disease. And that is why I am strongly recommending to all my patients to get the vaccine. So what's not going to change in the short term is that until many of us are vaccinated, a process that will probably require 5 to 6 months at least, we're going to keep wearing masks and washing and social distancing. Why is that? Because the vaccine is not 100% effective, right? Some people who got the vaccine still got COVID-19. So because of that, until the amount of virus decreases, which it will as more of us become vaccinated, we're still recommending that even vaccinated people use their masks. This is me getting my vaccine. I've only this evening, I'm going to go get my second shot. Today, but 28 days ago, I got my first shot. My arm was sore. The next day, I took Tylenol, and then by the day after that, I felt fine. The vaccine is free to everyone. No insurance is needed. No one should be paying for the vaccine. Now, people might be wondering, where can I get my vaccine? This is what we know so far, but this information will change. In San Francisco, the Department of Public Health and the mayor have announced 3 mass vaccination sites. One at the Embarcadero, one at the site of the farmers market on Alamany in the Bayview, and one at City College at the corner of Ocean and Geneva. At those sites, there will be huge numbers of people vaccinated every day. If you are a patient somewhere and you already have a doctor, a Kaiser doctor, or a doctor at San Francisco General, or at one of the clinics in the city, you can get vaccinated through your doctor. At San Francisco General, we have started vaccinations. We've already vaccinated more than 1,000 patients starting last weekend. And then finally, and what's very important, is for people who don't have a doctor, you can go to one of these vaccination sites, or they can go to a tent in the Mission or in the Bayview that the Department of Public Health hopes to set up. And we hope to work with you as community-based organizations to help our patients know about that. What about legal status? The vaccines in California, the vaccines are for everyone. There are parts of the United States where they're trying to keep the vaccine away from those of us who are undocumented. No one will ask a question in California about a patient's documentation status, not at the mass vaccination sites, not at any clinic or any tent. And finally, it's important to explain to all the members of our community that it is illegal to share information obtained about a patient when they were vaccinated with ICE. That is illegal and the person will be charged. So with that, let me stop here. Thank you for your attention and hope that we get lots of questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fernandez, for your presentation. We're going to open it up now to the panelists if they want to ask any initial questions.
I'd like to ask a question. Thank you, Dr. Fernandez. Thank you, Francine. We've heard tremendous concern from folks about the speed with which these vaccines were developed. Could you please, Dr. Fernandez, speak to how it came about that scientists were able to develop these vaccines in such a short time?
Yes, thank you for that great question. So these vaccines were developed very fast, and that does make everyone nervous. It makes them feel like, well, what step did they cut out? How do we know they're safe? So the important thing to know is that there's two parts to develop to getting a vaccine onto the market. One of them is developing the vaccine, and the other one is testing it to see whether it's safe enough and works well enough. The safety and testing part that these vaccines went through are the same safety and testing that all products go through, all vaccine products. And so there was no shortcut there, which is why we're happy to know that they're safe and effective. So how did they do it so fast if they didn't take a shortcut? They did it very fast for three reasons. One, the government put in enormous amounts of money in Operation Warp Speed to tell that really helped the vaccine companies invest, do a lot of things very quickly. Second, the reason that the science, that they were able to get the science right so fast is that people were working on a vaccine for another coronavirus, and that was SARS. Some of you may remember SARS, which was another coronavirus that actually started in China and went worldwide and was very big in Canada. And people were working on that coronavirus, and they had almost finished making that vaccine. And that made it a lot easier than to make this vaccine for this coronavirus, as those viruses are so similar. And third, the technology that this is doing, this vaccine is not grown in animals, it's not grown in eggs like other vaccines, it's made in a lab. And that makes the technology very clean, but also a lot faster. So for all those reasons, that's the step. The science is what went fast, but not the testing. The testing was done in the standard way. Thanks for that.
Hola, Dr. Fernandez, gracias for the presentation. We have a question around, for example, is right now the vaccine is not obligatory, or we're not, and there's a lot of people who are still kind of on the fence about it. Is there at some point, so a two-pronged question, is there going to be a certain point where a certain percentage of the population has to get the vaccine to reach like a critical mass? And do you think it'll ever be mandatory for us to get this vaccine moving forward?
Yeah, great questions. The first part of your question refers to something that you may have read about. It's called herd immunity. And one way to think about that is that let's assume that there's a herd of cows, lots and lots of cows, and all of them are vaccinated. And along comes a virus trying to get the one cow that's sitting in the middle of this herd and isn't vaccinated. It's going to be a lot harder. So that's herd immunity. There are different estimates of how many people need to be vaccinated to get to herd immunity. Some estimates are around 50% of the population. Some estimates are around 70% of the population. So they're different, and I don't know. Your question about mandatory is a good one. Right now, I don't think it can be made mandatory because it's under emergency authorization only and not full authorization. But I would not be surprised if very soon employers made it not mandatory, but the equivalent of mandatory, a condition of employment. In other words, an employer may say, you want to be a waiter in this restaurant. That's great. But in order to be a waiter in this restaurant, you have to have been vaccinated. So I suspect that a lot of employers will move to do that. And then we'll have to see how that works out.
Dr. Fernandez, a lot of people have asked the question about the pause in the Moderna vaccine. Do you have any new information about that?
Only what I've read in the newspaper. The one lot of the Moderna vaccine had like 8 or 10 allergic reactions, and that's too many. And so they pulled that lot. But now people are still vaccinating with other lots from Moderna vaccine, including we are in San Francisco General, and we don't. And there's been no problems with it.
Doctora Fernandez, there has been some questions brought up in the Q&A that I would also like to bring up. So one of them is, are there any thoughts on COVID-19 vaccine for pregnant women? And since there's no data on safety for this group, will there be safety data at some point?
Yes, a great question. I think my best advice to anyone who is pregnant right now is to talk to her doctor. And the reason is this. Let's suppose I'm a pregnant woman and I'm an essential worker, right? Then the small risk from the vaccine, such as it is, if there is any, is probably a lot smaller than the risk of getting COVID. Let's suppose that I'm a pregnant woman and I'm sitting pregnant at home and everyone in my household is working from home, right? Then I might say, oh, I don't even want to take that very small risk. So right now, what we're recommending is that all pregnant women talk with their doctors. Now, that said, there's going to be a ton of information on this in a month or two, because many, many, many pregnant women, including some of my pregnant colleagues, are choosing to get vaccinated. I hope that answer was clear. So Cindy, you tell me if it's not clear.
Yes, thank you.
Doctora Fernandez, we also had some people in the chat bringing up some questions regarding allergies and what to do if you've had a history of allergies. I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yes, great question. So this vaccine is safe for people with a history of allergies, peanut allergies, food allergies, shellfish allergies, allergies to pollen, allergies to medicines, allergies to penicillin or whatever. Go right ahead, take the vaccine. If you've ever had a very, very severe allergic reaction, the kind of allergic reaction where you have to be treated in the hospital, when you go and take the vaccine, instead of being watched for 15 minutes to make sure you're okay, that you tell the people that, and they will watch you for 30 minutes to make sure you're okay. There's only one group of people who should not take the vaccine, and that is people who have had an allergic reaction to the first shot. If you had an allergic reaction to the first shot, you shouldn't take the second shot of the vaccine. So normal allergies are totally fine. Go right ahead, get the vaccine. If you have a history of very severe allergies, tell them as they vaccinate you, because they will want to watch you for 30 minutes. And then finally, if you have an allergic reaction to the first shot, you should not get the second shot.
And there's a question around, once the vaccination efforts begin in San Francisco, what the process will be. For example, will there be appointments that are required, to adhere to safety protocols, and if any type of identification or proof of residency will be required?
Well, wonderful questions. So I think there's a lot of going back and forth about this issue on appointments, because making appointments makes it easier to space people out. And right now at San Francisco General, we're making appointments for people. On the other hand, as you know, it can be hard for many of our community members to make appointments. They may not have access to internet. There will be a phone number in English and in Spanish, and I hope in other languages as well, that people can call to make the appointment. And I hope that all of us in the CBOs work to give people those phone numbers. There will be no proof of residency required. No proof of residency required. All you need to do is give your name. Please do not worry about that. And if you're only, when you show up to the vaccine, if by any chance they ask you, oh, what's your name, or how do you spell it, or can you show me an ID, show whatever you have, including an ID from Mexico or from another country. Do not worry about that. The San Francisco Department of Public Health, we as your doctors, all of us, we are committed to making sure that all immigrants get this vaccine. As you all know, the people who have most died in California have been Latino immigrants. And we will do everything possible to make sure that everyone has access to this vaccine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctora. Speaking of access, we have several questions in the chat about access and when folks can expect to be able to get access, including questions from educators about whether.
Okay. So right now we're in, so the rules around access for the state of California have already been written, and they're so-called tiers, right? For tier 1 was healthcare workers and nursing home residents. And that's why healthcare workers like me got the vaccine really early on. Now we're going into the second part of tier 1, and that includes in California, anyone over 65. So if you're over 65, please tell community members, if you're over 65, you are now, it is now time for you to get the vaccine. It also includes community health workers, promotoras, people who work in community-based organizations who are patient-facing. It also includes people who work in education, teachers, teachers' aides, people, janitors who work in schools, people who work in education. And it also includes other types of healthcare work, like home care workers or nursing home workers. So please, all of you have the right to get the vaccine right now. So if you have a doctor, call the doctor and say, I think it's my turn now. Can I get an appointment? Kaiser is giving appointments. San Francisco, as I said, San Francisco General and its clinics are giving appointments. What if you don't have a doctor? Then you're going to have to wait until we set up these mass vaccination sites and these tests. But as soon as possible, you are you're at the very top of that list. So it's too bad we don't have better information to give people right now about how to get an appointment, but we don't.
Alicia, can you talk about some of the just representation of the study that was done? So a little bit about the race, ethnicity, and just the demographics of that.
Yes, we had a lot of people were worried about that. Who was going to sign up for this study, right? And in fact, they ended up getting a very nice mix of people. There were at least 10% African Americans and at least 10% Latinos. And it was about half men and women. And these studies are very large. The Pfizer study was 42,000 people. The Moderna study was over 30,000 people. So that's a lot of people. And that's why we know that it's safe for everybody.
You mentioned that San Francisco is offering vaccine at San Francisco General and other sites. We have questions about whether these are specifically for San Francisco residents or are they for others as well?
Right now, the sites at San Francisco General are for patients who get their care at San Francisco General or at one of the health clinics associated with it, like the Maxine Hall, Mission Neighborhood Health Center, Southeast Health Center, Castro Mission Health Center, etc. Those are the patients who right now are being prioritized for care at San Francisco General. In the future, they'll be open to other people, as will the mass vaccination sites. I don't know whether they will be open to people who don't live or work in San Francisco. But if you live or work in San Francisco, I suspect you will be able to get the vaccine.
That's it.
Fernandez, we also had some questions about prior COVID-19 infection. So is it recommended to get the vaccine if you've been infected?
Great question. So someone who has gotten COVID and they know that because they had a positive test and symptoms, those people probably have excellent natural immunity. But we don't know how long that's going to last. So we are recommending that those people get the vaccine. However, if you recently had it, then we're a little bit worried that when you get that, even when you get the first shot, you're going to get a really strong reaction from your immune system. So we're saying that if you've had COVID, wait at least 90 days before you get the shot. Does that make sense? So if you had COVID, get the shot, but wait at least 90 days because otherwise you may not feel good. The shot will still work, but you may not feel good. You may get a fever when you get that first shot. Please let me know, panelists, if there's things that I'm explaining that aren't clear, because we really want everything to be clear.
Here's another great question. It says, what protections should mixed households take if some have access to vaccines and others do not?
Yes, great question. Of course, it's much better that some have access, even if not everybody has access. But I think that if you're vaccinated, you are much less likely to get sick and less likely, we think, to transmit the virus, even if you do become infected. So look at it this way, your house is safer because some of you got the vaccine. Of course, the best thing is for all of us to be able to get it. But that will be true. For example, I'm vaccinated, but my 20-year-old daughter is not vaccinated. But I'm happy now because at least I'm vaccinated, makes it less likely for me to bring the vaccine home, bring the infection home to her. So getting the vaccine is, I think, will turn out to be a way not only to protect me, but to protect her. And I'm very happy about that.
Dr. Fernandez, sorry, go ahead.
One of the other common questions are, what is the difference between the first dose and the second dose, and why do folks need to get a second dose compared to other like the flu vaccine?
Yeah, great question. And I don't know the answer to that. The two dosages are exactly the same. It's like you get one and then a month later, you get the second one. They're exactly the same. You do have to, if you got the Moderna one as number one, then you do need Moderna as number two. And if you got Pfizer as number one, then you need Pfizer as number two. You can't mix and match because they're a little bit different. But I don't know why it works that way, but it does. One question that comes up frequently is what happens if I can't get to my second shot on day 21 or day 28, No problem. Waiting longer is not a problem to get your second shot. We don't want the two shots to come too close together, but if they take longer to get the second shot, that's okay.
There's some concern around, all the new strains that are being discovered of COVID-19. Is the two current vaccines by Pfizer and by Moderna effective against the new strains?
So far, yes, we think so. They've all been tested in the lab against the new strains, and they seem to be working fine. This is a huge worry. What happens if we get people vaccinated, but then the virus mutates and all of a sudden the vaccine doesn't start working? And so one of the things we can do is get everyone vaccinated as fast as possible, because then there'll be less virus around to mutate. But so far, the vaccine works against the new viruses.
We also have some questions about possible other like pre-existing conditions. So are there any pre-existing conditions that you would recommend somebody don't get the vaccine if they have them?
No, let's suppose I already said if you have diabetes or high blood pressure or arthritis or something else, the vaccine works for you and you should take it. Sometimes people say to me, yes, but I had cancer a few years ago. Can I still take the vaccine? Absolutely, and you should. What about if you have a weak immune system because you have HIV or because you're on some medicine that weakens your immune system? All the more reason to get the vaccine as quickly as you can because you're at more risk for getting a bad infection. So no, right now, there are no medical reasons for which not to get the vaccine.
Dr. Fernandez, there is this really great question, particularly within our Latinx community, about our older members listening to news and watching the TV about deaths that have occurred, particularly in Norway, with older people taking the vaccine. And how can we talk to them about what that means and what's happening in our community so that they do in fact agree to take the vaccine?
So there's a lot of information out there. Some of it is accurate and some of it is not. And one of the reasons we're having this speaker series is to give all of you, empower all of you with what we consider accurate information. Right now in the United States, as I said, there have been over 12 million people vaccinated. There have been no deaths linked to the vaccine. And you can say, well, I heard that a doctor died about 3 days after getting the vaccine. And that is still being looked into to see whether or not there was something else going on with that doctor. Lots and lots of older people are being what's the word I want? I'm sorry, are being vaccinated, right? Because we started by vaccinating people in nursing homes. And right now, there have been no deaths linked to the vaccine. But I'd also want people, I think it's an incredibly important question. But I think that one of the things that all of us are bad at is putting risks in context. So here's a question for all of you. What is more dangerous, getting the vaccine or driving to the site to get the vaccine? And the answer is driving. Driving causes over 50,000 deaths per year in the United States. Yet many of us will easily get into our car. Some of us even take our children in a car with us from time to time. And yet that is, from a medical point of view, a dangerous thing to do. Is it very dangerous? No. Is it more dangerous than getting the vaccine? It is enormously more dangerous than getting the vaccine. Because after 12 million shots, maybe there's one death linked to it. Maybe that death isn't linked to it. But driving is very dangerous. And yet all of us, or most of us, will have gotten into a car at some time. And these things are hard to weigh, you know, they're scary to weigh, but that's important for people to realize.
Thank you, Doctora. Do you have information about what proof of occupation folks may need to bring, since occupation is one designation that will enable folks to be eligible for vaccination?
No, I have heard all sorts of things. And what I've heard most often is that it's going to be on the honor system. But I also know that, in other words, people might just come forward and say, I'm a teacher, or I work in agriculture, or I'm an essential worker. But right now, there is still no word on that important question.
We had some questions come up about children, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the possibility of children getting vaccinated or what you would recommend.
Right. So right now, the only children who are eligible for the vaccine Well, right now, no children are eligible for the vaccine, right? Because we're making our way down the tiers. But pretty soon, I hope, people over 16 will be eligible, and maybe even people over 12, because we'll have the results of that second study. What about kids younger than 12? Right now, we have no information. To the best of my knowledge, none of the studies of the vaccines that are coming out are including kids. But I think that pretty soon they will start making studies with kids. And there's no reason in theory why kids shouldn't be vaccinated. The good news is that, as most of you know, while some kids get very, very sick from COVID-19, most kids do not. So fortunately, I think it's okay that the kids are waiting on this one.
You talked earlier, Doctora, about the fact that we've seen effectiveness in the vaccines with people with what we call comorbidities like asthma, diabetes, other chronic illnesses. Are there any any reasons, medical reasons, for which folks should not feel that it would be safe for them to make a decision to take the vaccine?
Not right now. Right now, the only people we're saying do not get the vaccine are people who've had a very severe allergy to the first dose. If someone has a very rare medical condition, they can talk to their doctor about it. But no, right now, there is none of the common medical conditions, none of them are what we call a counterindication to the vaccine. It means the vaccine is safe for all of those groups. And it has to do with the way the vaccine works. You know how I showed how it worked with the little piece of genetic material? That little piece of genetic material doesn't care whether you have another disease. Does that make sense?
Many of us have heard that you shouldn't get the vaccine if you've had a recent immunization. Can you speak a little bit to that?
I think that when people were doing this, they didn't want, when people were doing the studies, they asked people to hold off on getting other shots. And the reason for that is that if a person had a reaction, they wouldn't know whether it was a reaction to the flu shot or a reaction to the COVID shot or something. Right now, we're also asking that you try to separate them a little bit for a week or two. If you haven't gotten your flu shot yet, go ahead and do that while you're waiting for your COVID shot. But the bottom line is, if you can get your COVID shot, just jump in, and this is my recommendation. I would jump in and get it and not wait for anything else and then get the flu shot later.
There's a question about people with disabilities, whether they were, one, included in the trial, and two, if it's safe for them.
That's a great question. I don't know how many people with disabilities were included in trials. That wasn't reported out in the scientific paper, but I can't think of a reason why it wouldn't be safe. In other words, I think the way the mechanism works, I don't see why it wouldn't be safe.
Could you talk also a little bit about the immunization that you receive after having only one shot versus
Yeah, great question. People are saying, well, what happens if for some reason I only get the first shot? Well, the first shot gives partial protection. And there's different estimates of how long that is, but it's probably around 50% protection. So that's good, but it's not fantastic. It's good. So that's why we do recommend getting the 2 shots, but even 1 shot provides some partial protection. In order for the shot to start, it's not like you get the shot and then the next day you're 50% protected. The protection doesn't start until around week 3 or so. And then it gets a little bit bigger week 3, 4, and 5 as you move forward. And then after that, it doesn't get stronger. I hope I explained that clearly. So by about a month after the shot, you're about 50% protected. What we want is to take with the second shot is to get people to over 90% protected. I think we all want to take off our masks, and we all want to be able to see our families, and we want to be able to be with people. And the only way we're going to do that is if we can get most of us vaccinated really quickly.
Doctora Fernandez, is there like a centralized location where community folks can access the data and maybe, have it be translated to a simpler term to digest that information to be able to make well-informed decisions?
We will put out a frequently asked questions sheet of paper in English and in Spanish. But I think that for a lot of people, reading is helpful, but I think it's also helpful to talk with a doctor. So if you are a community-based organization that has lots of members, right, or serves the public in a big way, we have 45 UCSF doctors who are willing to come and do the same presentation that I did in English, in Spanish, Cantonese, and Tagalog. And those are languages we have capability for right now. We're working on Russian, and we have French. So if you are a member of a community-based organization and you want to host a Facebook Live, or you want to bring people together with a webinar or whatever, and you want one of our doctors to talk to your members, that's really great. And then you can also pass around the vaccine information sheet, which we will be putting together. Because I think people need both things. They need a chance to read something that they can understand, but they also need a chance to talk to a doctor, I think.
A little bit about the future vaccines that are being developed. So I know Johnson & Johnson is currently in the process and what that'll look like.
Yes. So the nice thing about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is that it will only be a one-shot vaccine, once and done, not two shots like the ones that have been approved so far. I don't know when it will be ready. We haven't seen the study results. Once the study results come out, then it should be, if the results are good, it should be approved within a couple of weeks after the results are in. So people are hopeful that by February, end of February maybe, it will be out. But I haven't seen any data on it, so I don't know whether that will be the case. So I also, while people, it looks like we're running out of questions, I think what's really good, people will hear all sorts of things on the web, that people are dying from the vaccine, not true. That the vaccine is causing women to become infertile, sterile, absolutely not true. What else are people hearing? I don't know, all sorts of information. And I hope that it's been helpful to all of you to get some information today in this session. For those of you who are members of community-based organizations, there is a lot of fear out there. Some of that fear is very well, is there for a good reason. The African-American community has been experimented on by doctors in the past. So have Latinos with the same syphilis study in Guatemala. In Puerto Rico, in the Dominican Republic, and other places, even in Mexico, the United States conducted sterilization abuse, and doctors did things to patients without doctors knowing. And so people are scared, and with anything new, people are scared, and there is a lot of misinformation about why was this able to be done so fast. So I think it's very reasonable for all of us as we move in the community to acknowledge that people are nervous, and that makes sense. But I hope you've also heard, at least from the presentation, that in fact, the reason it was made fast is because people were already working on a similar vaccine. And the way it was tested is the same way all vaccines are tested. And I, for one, I'm just really glad that I've been able to get the first shot today. I get the second shot. I'm really, really glad about that because as a doctor, I've also seen a lot of cases of COVID-19. And while some of those cases were okay, we've also taken care of very sick people and people who've died.
Doctora, we have a question in the chat, and I've also heard others ask about whether we know whether the vaccines are safe for folks with Down syndrome.
Yes, there's no reason that it isn't safe for someone with Down syndrome. Absolutely.
And similar with disabilities broadly?
Yes, yes, exactly. And it's if someone has a question about, well, if you're planning a pregnancy, should you not take the vaccine? No, on the contrary, if you're planning a pregnancy, get the vaccine right away. And that way you already have the vaccine before you get pregnant. And then also, what else is in here?
There's one,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say there's one about the vaccine tracking. So how can you make sure that you won't get first the Moderna and then the Pfizer? Is there
Right. That's why I'm telling people, explaining to people that people are their name is going to be entered into a computer file, and that computer file will say which shot they got, which lot number, everything. And that's why you do have to give your name. You can't just show up and not give your name and still get the shot. People will want the name. That's why it's really important for us to reassure everyone that this information, the name, the address or the date of birth, none of that can be shared with immigration. It is not, it's against the law here. But you will have to give your name so that it gets entered into the website of the vaccine registry so that we can keep track of which vaccine, which shot did you get.
Doctora Fernandez, are there other initiatives right now that are occurring within the medical community where to help educate more of the broader community so that folks can get vaccinated?
Yes, as I'm saying, we are coordinating a whole group of UCSF doctors. Is that what you mean? And they're willing to talk to community-based organizations and their members, or unions and their members, right? We know lots of people have what we call very high health literacy, right? They're going to go to a website, they're going to read it, they're going to make up their mind. We're interested in community members like ours, right? Which is to say workers who are essential workers, community members from the Latino communities and other communities. And so we want to make sure that we can reach those communities by doing this work, by educating. So if you have a thought about how to bring people together, we'll give you a doctor to give a presentation and answer people's questions. I think it may be time, unless anyone has one last question.
One last question, which I found interesting. There was a couple of people who asked, what if you get the first dose of the vaccine and then contract COVID?
You'll be partly protected and your COVID won't be as bad as if you had never gotten it, because your immune system will already know how to fight the COVID.
All right, well, unless there's any other last minute questions from the panelists, I just wanted to say thank you so much for all the panelists and as well for Dr. Fernandez, and especially for everyone from the CBOs who was able to join today. I think we all think it's really important, to be able to have open conversations and ask questions and everything. So as Leslie put in the chat, we will be posting the recordings of this as well as the Spanish monolingual session that occurred last week on the Latinx Center of Excellence website at UCSF, and the link is in the chat. And then we'll also be circulating around further resources such as the FAQs once we start coming out with those. So just thank you so much for everyone for attending, and feel free to email or anything if you have any additional questions.
We count on your partnership with the community-based organizations. We are here to partner with you. So we want you to lead. You tell us what type of education the community needs, we'll show up. But we want you to be the leaders, the drivers of all of this. So I hope that works. And thank you, Francine, and everyone else. I didn't mean to speak up after you already closed us. So, thank you all.
Gracias.
Gracias.